The galaxy had never seen anything like the Avarani. From the moment they first arrived, the universe felt their presence, not with an explosion or a clash of ships, but with an eerie silence that seemed to devour everything in its path. Their ships, sleek and vast, like dark shadows against the stars, didn't just travel through space, they commanded it. When they arrived at Earth, humanity was already in the midst of its greatest conflict yet, war on all fronts. The Avarani didn't need to announce themselves. Their power was enough to make the leaders of the world tremble. No human had ever dared to challenge them, nor did anyone think it was possible. The Avarani Empress, Aricia, was a being of unimaginable beauty and deadly power. Her pale, almost translucent skin shimmered like moonlight, and her eyes glowed with an unsettling brilliance, as if they held the secrets of the universe itself. She wasn't just the ruler of her people, she was a symbol of their might. Her guards, towering figures draped in dark armor, were more like living weapons than protectors. No one had ever seen an Avarani fall, and no one dared to think about it. They had conquered hundreds of planets, reduced entire species to mere whispers in the wind, and made the galaxy bow to their will. The people of Earth had no choice but to accept their presence. The Avarani didn't ask for submission, they simply took it. Governments crumbled, cities burned, and the very air seemed heavy with fear. There was no negotiation, no diplomacy. It was either surrender or die. And, for the most part, humanity did what it did best: they survived. But survival, it seemed, was all they could do. The Avarani had everything: power, technology, and a cruelty that could bend even the strongest minds to their will. In the heart of the Avarani's palace, a structure that seemed to rise from the bones of their fallen enemies, Aricia stood alone, looking out across the galaxy she had claimed. Her mind, sharp as a blade, could feel the tension in the stars. She could sense the hesitation in the humans below her, their whispers of defiance, but she dismissed them. To her, they were nothing more than a fleeting nuisance, a passing storm. Yet, there was something in the air that day, something different. It was subtle at first, just a tiny crack in the perfect illusion she had built, but it was there. Alex Voss, a man whose name was unknown to the galaxy and insignificant to the Avarani, had no intention of challenging the Empire. A former soldier turned smuggler, Alex was a survivor, not a hero. He had lived his life in the shadows, avoiding the larger battles, staying off the radar of those in power. But his past, though hidden, was filled with experiences that made him capable of extraordinary things. And that day, he found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time. Alex had been hired to transport a small cargo across the galaxy. Simple enough, or so he thought. What he didn't know was that his cargo had caught the eye of the Avarani. As his ship neared the Avarani's borders, his communication system scrambled, and his navigation went haywire. Before he knew it, he'd been pulled into a strange, silent gravitational pull, a trap laid out for him, though he never understood why. His ship crash-landed, its systems fried, leaving him stranded on a foreign planet with no way of escaping. The planet, however, wasn't ordinary. It was a stronghold, a place hidden deep within Avarani-controlled space. Alex, disoriented but instinctively alert, knew he had to get out before the Avarani realized he was there. But before he could think of a plan, the ground beneath his feet trembled. The sky, dark and swirling, was alive with an energy he had never felt before. It was as if the very planet was watching him, waiting for him to make a move. And then, just as he was about to run, they appeared. The Avarani guards, tall and fearsome, emerged from the shadows. Their presence alone was enough to make his heart race. Their eyes glowed with that same cold brilliance as their empresses, and their voices were calm, yet terrifying. "Human," one of them spoke, its voice deep and echoing. "You are not supposed to be here." Alex, knowing the futility of escape, tried to remain calm. He was not a fool. He had heard the stories how the Avarani crushed entire civilizations without breaking a sweat. He knew what they were capable of. And yet, as the guards approached him, something inside him snapped. The fear that had gripped him when his ship had been shot down turned into something else. Something sharp, something instinctual. A voice inside him whispered, "They will never break you. not today. For the first time in his life, Alex wasn't thinking of survival in the traditional sense. He wasn't running away or hoping for rescue. Instead, he took a deep breath, stood taller, and looked one of the Avarani in the eye. "You don't scare me," he said, the words coming out before he even realized what he was saying. The guards paused, their expressions unreadable. For a moment, there was silence, an unnatural, tense silence that seemed to stretch for eternity. Alex's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for the inevitable. But then, something strange happened. The Avarani didn't strike him down immediately. They didn't make any move at all. They just stared. The silence was broken by a soft, yet commanding voice, one that seemed to resonate from everywhere and nowhere at once. "What is this human doing here?" Aricia's voice, the voice of the Empress, drifted through the air like a whisper carried by the wind. It was calm, composed, but there was something more in it, a curiosity, an intrigue. A single figure appeared before Alex, the Empress herself. She was as beautiful as she was terrifying, her presence overwhelming in a way that made him feel small, insignificant. Yet, as she stood before him, something inside Alex pushed him forward. He didn't understand it, but he knew that if he was going to die, he wasn't going to die on his knees. "Who are you?" Aricia asked, her gaze never leaving him. Her eyes glowed brighter now, a pulse of energy that seemed to seep into his very soul. "I'm nobody," Alex replied, surprising even himself with his calmness. "But I'm not scared of you." The Empress, who had never once been challenged in such a way, felt something stir within her. It was something she had never experienced before. Not fear, but a sense of uncertainty. Could it be that this human was not like the others? Could he truly stand before her and not crumble under the weight of her power? The moment stretched longer than Alex wanted it to, but he held his ground. Something told him that this was no ordinary encounter. The Avarani had conquered countless worlds, but perhaps, just perhaps, this human would be the one to challenge them in a way they had never been challenged before. The moment was strange, an endless stretch of silence where nothing seemed to move, as if the entire galaxy had stopped spinning. Alex stood there, feeling the weight of the Avarani Empress's gaze upon him. She was a force of nature, and yet, despite every instinct telling him to flee or cower, he couldn't bring himself to look away. The soft hum of her presence resonated through the air like the hum of a distant storm, and it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. But for the first time in his life, Alex didn't feel fear. Instead, an odd feeling flickered in his chest, something like hope mixed with defiance. He wasn't sure what had driven him to say those words earlier. He wasn't even sure what had come over him. But now, standing before the Empress herself, he realized that the moment had already passed. There was no turning back. Aricia, still observing him with those piercing eyes, said nothing for several long moments. Her silence spoke volumes. She wasn't used to being disrespected, much less ignored. For centuries, no species had dared defy her. Her empire had spread across the stars like a tide that never receded, washing over civilizations and subduing them with ease. But now, for the first time, she had encountered a human who didn't flinch in her presence. Why? Aricia finally spoke, her voice smooth, like liquid ice. "Why are you not afraid?" Alex's mind raced. He knew what they said about the Avarani, how their mere presence could shatter a person's will, how they could break anyone who dared to stand against them with nothing more than their thoughts. The stories were true, and yet, here he was facing her without the crumbling fear he'd expected. Maybe it was because he had nothing left to lose. Maybe it was the sheer absurdity of the situation. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because he had always believed that even the most powerful forces could be challenged, given enough will. "I've seen worse," Alex said, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts in his mind. "You're not the first thing in this galaxy I've had to deal with. And you won't be the last." Aricia tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into something akin to amusement, though there was no warmth in it. "Interesting," she murmured. "Humanity. You are not like the others. You are a curiosity, a rarity among your kind." She paused, her eyes narrowing as though calculating something. "Perhaps you believe your will to be stronger than mine, but you have no idea what you are up against." I have seen galaxies burn, civilizations crumble, and species beg for mercy. And yet, you think you can stand before me as though you were equal? Her words were a challenge, and for the briefest moment, Alex's heart raced again, but he stood firm. He couldn't let her break him now. I don't think I'm equal to you, he replied. I know I'm not. But that doesn't mean I can't fight. Something in Aricia's expression shifted, though she didn't show it. She had never encountered such defiance from a human, and that struck her deeper than she realized. She was intrigued, yes, but there was also a growing sense of unease in her, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge in centuries. You are brave, she said after a long pause, her voice now carrying a note of something akin to respect. But bravery alone will not save you. Not from me. Not from us. With a flick of her hand, the guards surrounding them moved forward, their presence like shadows closing in. Alex's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't flinch. This wasn't just about him anymore. If he were to die today, he wouldn't die like so many before him on their knees. He would die fighting. The guards halted, awaiting their empress's command, but she didn't speak immediately. Instead, she studied Alex once more, a strange sense of curiosity flickering in her glowing eyes. She had never understood humans. They were, by nature, weak, fragile creatures, their lives short, their bodies frail compared to most other species she had encountered. Yet here he was, standing tall, showing a courage that even the most hardened of warriors couldn't match. This wasn't something she could dismiss easily. You're not afraid of dying, she observed, her voice now calm. That is unusual for your kind. I've been close before, Alex replied. Doesn't mean I'm ready to go yet. Aricia, though still unsure of what to make of him, found herself drawn to the strange, raw energy emanating from this human. It was something she had never witnessed in any other species. Most beings quivered in her presence, bending before her power, yet this man stood tall and unyielding. After a long silence, Aricia finally spoke again, her tone shifting, becoming almost thoughtful. I will give you a chance, human. Not because I am merciful, but because I am curious. You will fight. But you will not fight with weapons or strength. You will fight with your mind. Before Alex could respond, the guards stepped aside, revealing a strange, pulsating device on the ground before him. It glowed with an unnatural, shifting light, its form both organic and technological, as though it had been grown rather than built. You will face the trial of minds, Aricia declared, her voice echoing in the still air. If you survive, I may let you leave. If you fail, your mind will become my weapon, and your will shall be bent to my control. Alex's gaze shifted to the device, the fear that had started to creep back into his chest now fighting against his determination. The trial of minds, he had heard rumors, whispers in the dark corners of the galaxy, but never had he thought he'd face it. It was said that few survived the trial, and even fewer came out with their minds intact. But he couldn't back down. This wasn't just a test of survival, it was a test of everything humanity stood for. I accept, Alex said, his voice unwavering. The Empress nodded slowly. Very well, human. Prepare yourself. As Alex stepped forward, the device began to hum, its light intensifying. He could feel it. Something in the air shifted as if the very fabric of reality was changing. He had no idea what was to come, but one thing was certain, this would be the fight of his life. And if he had anything to say about it, he would not let humanity fall without a fight. The spark had been lit. The human defiance was no longer a fluke, a random act. It had become something more, something that, for the first time, the Avarani did not know how to handle. The moment Alex stepped toward the glowing device, he felt his heartbeat quicken, his breath sharp in his chest. The Avarani Empress, standing tall and untouchable behind her throne of shadows, looked on with silent observation. The trial of minds was a test that many had failed. Few had survived. But Alex wasn't just facing a test of survival. He was standing at the precipice of something larger, something that could change the fate of all humanity. The device before him hummed with a strange energy, its pulsating light sending waves of heat across the air. It seemed to breathe, shifting in shape as if alive. Alex's instincts screamed at him to turn back, to run, to hide. But he had no choice now. He couldn't turn back. His body may have been human, fragile, but his mind was his weapon, and it had to be enough. "Do not hesitate," Erisia's voice rang out, cold and clear, her gaze fixed on him. "This will test your very essence, your mind, your will, your soul. Fail, and you will become part of the Avarani. Succeed, and you may just learn something about your true potential." With those final words, the device flickered, sending a shockwave through the room that made Alex's knees buckle for a split second. He gritted his teeth and stood tall, fighting the overwhelming surge of power that seemed to invade his senses. The trial had begun at first. It was subtle. The room around him seemed to distort, the edges of reality blurring. His vision swam, and he struggled to keep his footing. For a moment, he thought he had lost himself entirely. Then came the voices, whispers. Low, distant murmurs at first, growing louder with each passing second. They called to him, seductive and sweet, tempting him to give in. They spoke of failure, of how insignificant he truly was, how humanity was nothing more than an afterthought in the grand scheme of the universe. They tried to remind him of everything he had lost: the family he could never protect, the home that had been destroyed by the war, the loneliness that had followed him all his life. He clenched his fists, his mind screaming in defiance. He had faced hardship before. He had seen darkness, had fought through the worst. And he was not going to let his mind break now. But the trial was not done. The voices morphed into images, flickering visions of his past. He saw himself as a child, helpless in the face of an invasion, watching as his world burned. He saw his younger self, sitting alone in a forgotten corner of a broken city, his eyes hollow with the weight of survival. He saw the moment he left everything behind to become a smuggler, taking the path of least resistance rather than the one that demanded true courage. The visions were real, so painfully real that Alex felt the sting of every lost moment, every failure, every regret. They reached deep into his mind, pulling on every thread of his soul. It would have been so easy to give in, to let the emotions wash over him and let the trial take its toll. But Alex held on. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was fighting. Suddenly, the visions shifted. The faces from his past faded, and the room around him became something else entirely, something alien. The walls stretched upward, infinite and black, the floor beneath him shifting like sand. He was no longer in the Avarani's stronghold. He was in a landscape of his mind, a place where his thoughts and memories took shape. And standing before him was a figure. A mirror image of himself, but not quite. It was a version of Alex, the version he had feared the most. This was the man who had failed, the man who had given up, the man who had let fear control him. It was everything he had tried to bury within himself. "Is this really who you are?" the figure asked, its voice echoing in the endless space. "You think you're strong, but you are just like them. Weak. Helpless. You can't even save yourself." Alex recoiled, his heart pounding. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But the image of himself stood before him with eyes that were full of mockery and doubt. The man he had been. "You can't fight destiny, Alex," the figure continued, stepping closer. "You'll always be a pawn. Always a failure. Humanity is nothing." A dark, familiar chill washed over him. For a moment, Alex doubted himself. What if it was true? What if he was just a small cog in the Avarani's grand design, a fleeting moment in the galaxy's endless timeline? But then, something inside him snapped. He wasn't this person. He wasn't this failure. The thoughts, the doubts, they didn't define him. He had survived the worst of what the universe had thrown at him. He had seen destruction, yes, but he had also seen the spark of something greater: hope. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology, its power, or its numbers. It was its ability to rise from the ashes, to adapt, to fight when there was no reason to fight. Alex took a deep breath, steadying himself. The trial was testing his will, his very essence. And he would not falter. Not now. No, he said, his voice low but firm, reverberating through the darkness. I'm not you. I'm not weak. I'm not a failure. I'm human. With those words, the figure before him faltered, its form twisting, dissolving into nothingness. The landscape around Alex shifted again, the infinite black walls vanishing to reveal something else, a bright, shining light. Suddenly, Alex was back in the Avarani stronghold, the trial complete. He blinked, disoriented for a moment, but the sense of victory flooded over him. He had faced his deepest fears, his own self-doubt, and conquered them. Aricia stood before him, her expression unreadable. For the first time, there was something in her eyes that wasn't pure disdain. There was a flicker of recognition, though it lasted only a moment. She didn't speak immediately, but the silence between them was thick with unspoken understanding. The trial had tested his mind, and Alex had passed. Not only had he withstood the assault on his psyche, but he had broken through the walls the Avarani thought could never be breached. You have surprised me, human, Aricia said finally, her voice as cold as ever but with a hint of something else respect. You are different. Perhaps not as weak as I thought. Alex didn't smile. He wasn't here to win her approval. But in that moment, he knew that humanity's fight had just begun. He had shown the Avarani that the human spirit could not be so easily broken. And if he could survive this trial, he could survive anything. But deep inside, he also knew this was only the beginning. The Avarani might have underestimated humanity's power, but soon they would learn just how wrong they were. The trial had ended, but the weight of it still lingered in Alex's chest, a lingering thrum of adrenaline and determination. He had survived the Avarani's mental assault, stood his ground before their empress, and now found himself standing in the heart of their power. The momentary respect Aricia had shown him hung in the air, a fragile thread that connected them in a way that neither of them fully understood. For the first time since he'd crashed on this alien world, Alex felt a spark, one he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the hope of escaping, nor the fleeting hope of survival. It was something deeper. He had fought not just for himself, but for something larger, humanity's very survival. The Avarani might have their empire, their weapons, and their control, but they had never faced a force like the human spirit. As he stood there, breathing slowly, still adjusting to the alien landscape of his own mind, he couldn't shake the realization that this was no longer just about one man's fight, it was about humanity's last stand. Aricia had watched him closely, her expression guarded but unmistakably curious. She was not accustomed to such displays of willpower. Her species had evolved with the cold certainty that they were untouchable, that their strength was unrivaled. To see a human, not even a soldier, not a commander, but a simple man defy her like this was unsettling, even for her. You have passed the trial of minds. Aricia spoke at last, her voice as cold and controlled as ever, but now there was something more in it. Something that hadn't been there before. But do not mistake your survival for victory. The war is far from over. The Avarani are not kind to those who challenge their authority. And you have done more than challenge us. She paused, her gaze narrowing as she took a step forward. You have proven that you are a threat. The words struck Alex with an unsettling finality. I'm not a threat. I'm just a man. But that doesn't mean I won't fight for my people. The Empress's eyes glittered. Fight? What do you have that could stand against us? What could humanity offer that would be of any use in this war? Alex met her gaze, feeling something stir deep within him, something that was more than just anger, it was a burning truth. You might be stronger than us in many ways, but you've forgotten one thing about humanity. We don't give up. Not when it counts. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence between them, but Alex could feel the tension rising. The Avarani were known for their ruthlessness, their cold logic, and their superior technology. But there was something they couldn't understand, the heart of a species that had fought and survived against impossible odds. You are mistaken if you think your stubbornness will win this war, Aricia said, though her voice had lost some of its edge. There was an odd note of contemplation in it, as if she, too, was questioning the fate of this conflict. You may have proven something today, Alex Voss, but what you fail to understand is that we do not fight wars the way you do. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Alex wondered what she meant. What could be worse than the brutal conflicts humanity had already endured? The Avarani were not known for diplomacy, not for mercy, not for reason. They had wiped out entire civilizations without a second thought. Before Alex could respond, a low rumble shook the ground beneath them. He felt it first in his feet, a deep vibration that rippled through the air like a warning. It didn't come from the sky, nor the ground it came from inside the Avarani stronghold itself. Something had triggered an alarm, a sudden shift in the atmosphere that made his senses flare with danger. Aricia's expression shifted, her gaze flicking toward the distance. There was no panic in her eyes, only a quiet, chilling calculation. "It seems your presence here has already begun to draw attention," she said, her voice flat, almost amused. "And the Avarani are not forgiving." Alex felt a sudden, cold realization crawl up his spine. Something was happening, something that was beyond his comprehension. The air around them thickened, a crackling energy that made his skin prickle. Aricia didn't flinch, her attention focused solely on the space around them, her hands folding behind her back as though preparing for something. Then, before Alex could make sense of it, the walls began to shift, the smooth, crystalline structure of the stronghold flickering and warping. It was as though the very architecture itself was alive, responding to an unseen force. A door opened, and from it, a group of Avarani soldiers appeared, not in their usual dark armor, but in something far more intimidating, sleek, shimmering suits of armor that seemed to pulse with energy, glowing bright with power. The guards didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence alone radiated a brutal calm. As they moved into position, Alex saw the weapons they carried, large energy cannons that crackled with dark energy. Aricia turned back to Alex, her lips curving into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "This is the true strength of the Avarani," she said softly, as though speaking to herself. "You think you can survive by sheer willpower alone? Then let's see if you are truly ready to face us." The soldiers stepped forward, their weapons humming with deadly precision. Alex's instincts kicked in. He wasn't here for a fight like this, not yet. He had no weapons. He had no allies. But there was one thing he did have, a mind that wouldn't bend, a heart that wouldn't yield. And if it came to a fight, he'd find a way to survive. He wasn't just going to fight for his own life. He was going to fight for the future of every human being who had ever lived under the shadow of the Avarani Empire. With a deep breath, Alex stepped forward, his hands ready to fight, his mind already calculating the next move. He had no idea how he would escape, or if he would survive the coming battle. But he knew this much: the human spirit was not something the Avarani could crush. Not so easily. As the Avarani soldiers advanced, Alex's pulse raced. This was it. The fight was no longer just a trial. It was a war for his life, and a war for the future of Earth. The air was thick with the crackle of energy as the Avarani soldiers advanced, their weapons gleaming with a terrifying precision. Alex stood in the center of the room, his body tense, his mind racing. There was no escape now. There was no time to rethink his plan, to devise a strategy. The battle was upon him. The Avarani Empress, Aricia, watched him closely, her cold eyes never leaving his figure as he braced himself. The soldiers, those terrifying, sleek, armored figures, moved with a perfect synchrony, surrounding him. Each step they took echoed in the chamber like the footsteps of death itself. Alex's pulse quickened, but his resolve remained unshaken. He wasn't the same man who had first stood before the Empress, terrified of the unknown. He had faced the trial of minds and come out victorious. He had proven that humanity's will was not something to be dismissed, and now he would show them that humans could stand, not just as survivors, but as fighters. "Do you think you can fight us?" Aricia's voice sliced through the tension in the room like a blade, her tone still cool but laced with an edge of amusement. "You are outmatched. Outclassed. Even with all your determination, you stand no chance." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, daring him to respond. But Alex didn't answer. He didn't need to. He knew what the Avarani underestimated. It wasn't just brute force that made humans resilient. It was the refusal to give up, the relentless desire to press forward no matter the odds. The first soldier lunged at him, its energy cannon aimed straight at his chest. Without thinking, Alex dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast, feeling the heat pass inches from his body. The explosion scorched the ground where he had been standing, sending a cloud of debris into the air. His heart hammered in his chest as he rolled to his feet. The soldiers were relentless, calculating, and precise. There was no room for error. Another blast fired, but Alex was ready this time. He ducked low, his body moving on pure instinct, his mind firing commands faster than he could think. His eyes locked onto a nearby pillar, one that was cracked, its surface shattered from the blasts, and he knew in that instant it was his only advantage. He didn't have time to hesitate. Sprinting toward the pillar, Alex used his momentum to leap onto its surface, pushing off with all his strength. As he soared through the air, the energy cannon fire from the Avarani soldiers collided with the pillar, sending chunks of debris flying. The explosion threw him off course, but he landed hard, rolling to absorb the impact. The ground trembled beneath him as he came to his feet, eyes darting around for his next move. "Is this your plan?" Aricia's voice was laced with quiet disbelief. "A futile attempt at evasion? It will not work." But Alex wasn't just trying to evade. His mind was already working, calculating the next strike, the next move. The soldiers were powerful, but they were still predictable. The Avarani didn't fight like humans did, spontaneously, with creativity and resourcefulness. They relied on their technology, their superior weaponry, their unflinching discipline. But Alex knew how to turn their strength into their weakness. He had done it before, back in the smuggler's den, escaping from impossible situations with nothing but quick thinking and a gut feeling. The same instincts that had kept him alive were now guiding him through this battle. As the soldiers closed in, Alex took a deep breath. This was it. There was no room for mistakes. He dashed forward, zigzagging to throw off their aim. The first soldier fired. Alex rolled again, barely missing the blast, and then, with lightning speed, he dove forward, grabbing a discarded piece of metal from the floor. It wasn't much, just a jagged piece of debris, but it was enough to give him the advantage. With a roar, Alex hurled the piece of metal toward the nearest soldier's energy cannon. The impact sent the weapon careening off course, disrupting the soldier's aim just long enough for Alex to close the gap. With a swift movement, he kicked the soldier's feet out from under it, sending it crashing to the ground. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The Avarani soldier struggled to regain its footing, its weapons sparking and flickering. But Alex didn't give it time. He pounced, disarming the soldier in a flurry of motion and kicking it to the side, out of the fray. Before the other soldiers could react, Alex had already moved again, darting between them with speed and precision. He didn't need to defeat them all, not yet. He only needed to create an opening. He needed to show them that he wasn't some helpless human at their mercy. He was a threat, a force they hadn't anticipated. Aricia's gaze shifted from passive curiosity to something more intense. Her cold eyes narrowed. "Impressive," she muttered. "But it will not be enough." Her words were almost a challenge in themselves, and yet Alex could see the flicker of doubt in her expression. The Avarani Empress was powerful, yes, but there was something more at play here, something she hadn't seen in millennia. Humans were unpredictable, wild, and that, Alex knew, was exactly what they needed to win. Suddenly, there was a flash of light in the corner of the room, followed by the sound of crackling energy. The rest of the soldiers had regrouped, and now they aimed their weapons directly at him. A coordinated strike, no room for escape. Alex's heart raced as the energy cannons powered up. But just as he prepared to make his final move, a voice rang out from the shadows, cold and familiar. Enough. It was a command, and it stopped everyone in their tracks. Aricia's gaze snapped toward the source of the voice, her expression unreadable. A figure emerged from the darkened corner of the chamber, a figure Alex recognized instantly. It was one of the high-ranking officers in the Avarani military, a man who had once been an ally of Aricia, but whose loyalty had long been uncertain. The officer spoke again, his voice sharp and commanding. "The Empress has underestimated humanity. This war, this battle, it is no longer hers to win alone. Alex's mind raced as the soldiers hesitated. Something had changed. He didn't know how or why, but he could feel it. Something had shifted in the power structure of the Avarani Empire. "Your fight is not with this human, Empress," the officer said, his tone more resigned than defiant. "It is with something larger. Something beyond even you." Aricia looked at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even a trace of fear. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice cold, but tinged with uncertainty. "The Avarani Empire is crumbling," the officer said simply. "You cannot defeat humanity through brute force alone. This war will not end in your favor." Aricia's gaze hardened, but she said nothing. Alex, his chest still heaving from the battle, looked around at the soldiers at the chaos that had erupted in the wake of the officer's words. For the first time in the history of their empire, the Avarani were uncertain. And that uncertainty, that seed of doubt, was all Alex needed. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the future of humanity. For every person who had ever believed that no force in the universe could hold them down. As the Empress's soldiers began to retreat, their confidence shaken, Alex stepped forward, standing tall in the center of the room. He wasn't defeated. He wasn't broken. And neither was humanity. The Avarani had underestimated them, and that mistake would cost them more than they could imagine. With the dawn of a new era approaching, the last words Alex spoke echoed through the chamber, a challenge to every power that ever sought to crush humanity's spirit. This is just the beginning.